What's up, everyone? Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Jessica Pallett, Texas House District 94 candidate for state representative. Jessica Pallett, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So for our audience who doesn't know, Jessica Pallett is a candidate running for the Texas House District 94 for state representative, and Jessica's running as a Libertarian.
Yes, this is my third time on the ballot running as a Libertarian in my district.
Very nice, very nice. And so why don't you tell us, just first off, before we kind of dive into things, tell us a little bit about yourself. And yeah.
Well, I'm Jessica. I'm a mommy. I'm a yogi. I have a full-time job as a business analyst at a large financial firm. And I'm also a high performer. I've been using cannabis for my personal medicine for a while now. And I've been using it for anxiety, just for chilling, just basically to have a better quality of life. And when I determined that I'm committing no crimes truly and I'm hurting no one else, I saw that some of my friends, some of their friends are going to prison for possessing a little bit of plant in their pocket. And I made it my mission to take my bold confidence about cannabis to the streets. And I try to let everyone know that the state hurts people with cannabis laws. And it's not really a war on drugs. I mean, they're not fighting the plant. It's really a war on people. So everything that I do in my activism, whether it be running for office, hosting events to have awareness, or meeting with lawmakers to try to change laws, it's a result of me just wanting to make the place cleaner than I found it and better for my daughter.
So that's so interesting that you say, you kind of sat back, you were a user at first. As you kind of got more into the cannabis community, you saw that people were actually being arrested and thrown in jails for having even small amounts of marijuana, right, in their possession.
Yes.
So that just kind of just drove you to say, you know what, this is an infringement on our personal freedoms. And so that's really what got you going in this space?
Yes. And while I know that I'm responsible and accountable for my personal freedoms, and a lot of us, people that don't stand up even, are just quietly breaking the law behind doors and we're not getting caught. And that's a really good thing, knock on wood. But there are people who can't speak for themselves. There are children, for example, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds who are getting caught with a little bit of plant in their pocket, and the collateral criminal consequences for them, ruining their college careers, not allowing them to be able to get financial funding, not allowing them to be able to stay at certain rental places just because of the plant. And no one can speak for them. No one can speak for those who are already behind bars. No one can speak for those people whose families are already ruined, or they're on paper, as you say, on a probation. They can't take their medicines. Their personal relationships might be suffering because they're not allowed to have their medicine. It's just personal freedom. I'm speaking for them. I mean, they've already had such bad experiences with the law. They are less likely to go out there and put themselves out there again. So it's up to everybody else who has this guilty knowledge that the state is hurting people so bad to do everything we can and to be bold until times change.
And it seems like it's a lot of anecdotal data, right? It's a lot of these politicians, and I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying some, maybe the majority. They don't have experience with the plant, right? Some of them never consumed it. Some of them never inhaled. Some of them haven't really done the research in terms of learning the medicinal benefits of the cannabinoids that we've been talking about on this podcast. And so it's just kind of like someone sitting back and saying, hey, we're going to deny you of this plant, of this medication, simply because we think it's wrong, or we think it's bad, or it's listed as a Schedule 1 narcotic, which it has been for the last 40, almost 50 years now.
Yeah.
That's got to be frustrating.
Oh, it's extremely frustrating. And I think that one more frustration that people tend to look over is that let's not forget that just about half of America votes to keep cannabis in the prohibition state. And the other half of America thinks they're voting to end prohibition, but none of the politicians are actually working hard to end politician. Well, with few exceptions, I'm sorry. But any politicians that are getting votes, I'm very frustrated because citizens have put their own prohibitors in office, and they continue to keep their own prohibitors in office by not researching their candidates and voting properly.
Would you say part of the reason why that is because people are so either red or blue? I mean, there's this.
Yes, I didn't want to name colors, but yes, red team and blue team, I am talking to you. You are electing prohibitors. Everyone, every blue team or red team candidate that you are electing is taking away your personal freedoms. And this is the frustration because so many of my friends repping blue team, for example, will wear a sticker on their car for a candidate that so proudly wants to take away their personal freedoms. And they can't seem to understand that you cannot vote on one issue. Just because a candidate says, I smoked weed a long time ago and it's cool, you don't just vote them in. This isn't how it works. It's a more serious matter. And I feel shame when my friends are voting for their prohibitors.
Well, that's part of the challenge, I think, with the political landscape, especially today, is that it's such a hodgepodge of like, you can't really have certain social issue perspectives when one side, and then your fiscal beliefs are another. It's kind of like they just kind of hodgepodge and put everything together and say, no, if you're a Republican, you think this way, and here's how you view social issues, and if you're a Democrat, here's how you view social issues. And they're both always, of course, in opposition. But um, I really wish that there was more discussion around, hey, look, I may be a red or a blue, but let me talk about what I think about when it comes to cannabis reform or LGBTQ rights or freedom of speech and things like that. But it's just so you're put in a box and that's it, right?
Right. And one thing you said about each group having their issues and them being opposite, I think what people neglect to know is that red and blue are very much aligned when it comes to a lot of things. When it comes to massive government spending, red team is going to spend it on the defense. Blue team is going to spend it on the defense, spend heavily. They're going to have us armed to the teeth for foreign wars and not in the defensive and neutral position which we should be. Red team is going to get into your business and say that you cannot get married. Blue team is going to get into your business and tell you that you can't keep your money. Both of the teams are voraciously growing the government. It seems like sometimes they feel like they won't be happy until there's one government per person. Man, I swear. The only team color that are breaking down the government, that are giving you more access to your personal freedoms, which is what I truly think red and blue teams go for. But why go for just a little bit of freedom when you could have all of it? And that's why I vote gold every time, no matter what. And I encourage my friends to do so as well.
So I have a question. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I have a question for you. So when it comes to cannabis reform at the federal level,
Yes.
What would you say is the primary objection for, being more lenient on cannabis laws? So, for instance, uh, health, right? We saw the vape scrutiny that happened most recently. I think I don't know the exact number. 68 people I think were reported dead
Mhm.
from vape related lung illness, but a lot of the blame was pointed to the THC cartridges, right? Yet, on the other hand, you have the cigarette industry who kills almost 500,000 people per year, and we hear nothing about that kind of stuff. So, my question is the federal government's concern when it comes to cannabis and their reasoning for it, is it health? Is it profit because they know that the hemp plant has many applications and may replace some industries? I mean, what is the fear? What is the opposition?
Well, I think you stated it. It's the profit. It's definitely not the government's job to keep us healthy. They never have. They established a department, FDA. You might know them. Well, they're supposed to make sure people are safe, but 42% of their prescription labels say death as a side effect. Can you imagine that? So I can only agree with you and say that it's for profit. The prison industry, putting people in jail for plants, is huge money. And when the government says they're going to create jobs, I want people to be aware that those are the type of jobs they'll create. They'll create prison jobs to put plant people in jail. Also, it's parts of the country, it's fine and legal and profitable because the citizens in those areas have determined that they are more powerful than the state. Places where people just can't seem to figure out why they can't uh, get it going the way Colorado has, for example. It's because they're trying to play nicey nice and cooperate with the state, who has always shown that they don't give two snuts about them. So I think it's profit driven, most obviously. And we've also noticed that in places where cannabis commerce has become more prevalent, that the government is saying, give me that cash too. So everywhere the government gets involved, it's bad stuff for the plant. So I recommend that people try to do their best to survive in the prohibition state, showing their state that they are bigger, powerful, and that their needs are stronger, not by playing nicey nice and fitting into their skinny cannabis lanes that drive very slowly.
Hmm. So yeah, you mentioned slowly. I'm glad you brought that up because it's one pattern that I've seen, at least at the state level, when it comes to full recreational cannabis use. Has There's been stages, right? So first, the state will decriminalize marijuana. So own or having in your possession a small amount, it's kind of written off as a citation. The next move is then medicinal marijuana, where the state is medically legal to sell cannabis to patients who need it. And then they move, full press to the recreation, right? Which we see California, Colorado, many other states. I think there's 13 now, or maybe
Right.
more. Um, so Texas, we're at phase one because in April of 2019, we have now decriminalized cannabis possession, so that's great. But where do you think Texas falls into that reform, and how fast or how slow are we moving at this point?
Well, Texas is an extremely large state. And as you know, when something's large, you've got to like slowly move it, I suppose. But I would say that Texas is kind of not in a phase one, in that we have had some type of a medical program since 2015 with the Texas Compassionate Use Program. We know that it serviced a very small amount of Texans. It costs more to administer the program than to actually support the users of the program. And then in 2000, in the last legislation, Texas state benevolently allowed the Texas Compassionate Use Program to expand, if you know what I mean. And for people who are happy about it, I hope those patients who are now included are having the quality government experience that they want to with their cannabis. But how will I know? Because I'm a patient who still can't get her cannabis legally. And I can venture to say that you are as well, Kevin, a patient who still cannot get their cannabis legally. I'm not happy with staying in the slow lane and watching next legislative session. Maybe they'll expand the program a little more. I'm not happy with it, Kevin. I want to have my personal freedoms now, especially since it's a plant.
Right. I had on two episodes ago, we had Manuel Fresh Ordaz and his business partner Mike Hendricks, who is the executive director of the Go Hemp Association, or
Awesome.
Texas Go Hemp Association. And well, I was just astounded by the fact that the Texas legislation meets on a biennial basis. So
What the heck, right?
that blows my mind. Not only, of course, because we're focused on cannabis reform in this particular conversation, but how does anything uh, get moved along? Meeting every 2 years, that
Well,
seems.
the answer is nothing. As you can see, nothing is done. We pay for a extremely large, expensive building for these jerks to use for a very small amount of time every other year. And everybody gets on their suits and they parade and they get so excited to meet these jerks. And when they meet them, they're running a business at this time, a business that we fund. And I have seen some of my fellow cannabis activists that have driven to the Capitol, gone to see their lawmakers, and were turned away by either lobbyist leaders telling them they were not dressed appropriately, or by state representatives or their staffers who simply didn't have the scheduling time to meet with constituents. Kevin, this is a circus. It's basically a show that comes into town every couple years that yields no value to its citizens, especially people who want to take their personal freedoms. It's a hot mess, my friend.
So what can we do? I mean, obviously, getting out to the polls, voting for the right people that are have our best interests, right? People like yourself who really are advocating for personal freedoms. But I mean, what else can we do to push these lawmakers to really understand that this is beneficial? This is good.
Well, if you want to push the lawmakers to understand what is beneficial and what is good, you can spend all of your time doing that. You can go to Who Represents Me, just Google Who Represents Me, type in your email address, and you will see the local office of your state representative on which they should be at work. If they're not, that's another reason why things are not getting done. They should be at work and you should be able to speak to them and tell them your story. But if you have a representative like mine in my district, Tony Tinderholt, he took a while to get him to come around. And the first time he voted no for a Texas compassionate use program because he was extremely concerned with what the little old ladies in the district thought. This is his words. But now he votes yay because we were in his office with 2, 3, 4 advocates. Tony was researching online how the benefits of cannabis go. However, one representative does not make the laws change. So for every one representative who is knowledgeable about cannabis, you should assume that there are at least one other that is absolutely not, based on, like you said, the fact that red teamers are not supposed to like this plant, except for some people, allowing some people, and blue teamers are only supposed to like this plant for some people as well.
Do you think that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, um, obviously saddening that a lot of people have lost their lives, family members, people have gotten sick, the economy is doing bad, and also small business owners are suffering, right? Do you see at a state level, Texas, or even a federal level, that marijuana and cannabis may be a consideration to help alleviate some of that economic loss, through.
Well, of course, legalizing cannabis and creating a state commodity which can be taxed will be profitable for a state, is the answer, Kevin. But based on the principles of it, if you are waiting around for the state to legalize cannabis for any reason, especially if you're waiting for them to legalize cannabis to stabilize the economy, you're going to be waiting a long time. So, uh, while yes, the answer is yes, it would definitely stimulate economy. Personally, for me, taking my freedoms, I don't feel that stimulated.
True. I mean, hemp is now legitimized, right?
Yes.
2018, the Farm Bill was passed. Texas did a great job of getting their stuff together and submitting their state plan to the USDA to get approved in 2019. As of this year, I think over 600 Texas licenses have been issued for farmers to grow hemp. So that's a good sign in the right direction, right? I mean, at least we're able to grow this crop at a large scale and do more research around the cannabinoids that are found within the plant. What do you think about that?
I think that if this is exciting to you and you celebrate it, that's wonderful. I think that the state giving a government permission slip for people to grow a plant, oh my, that's wonderful. But for me, Kevin, I don't quite celebrate yet. I'm not looking for a government permission slip for farmers. And just on a side note, I want to remind all my red and blue teamers out there that in 2015, I believe, or 17, Bill Zedler, a Republican representative, launched a hemp bill. Why? Why would they want hemp all this time if they're on the red team, Kevin? So my point is just to say that all these guys are working together towards the profit. So don't place your faith in the red and blue team so hard.
I'm very skeptical of both red and blue. So I do want to go on record saying that.
Thanks, Kevin.
My deal is I'm just trying to be optimistic and hopeful.
Absolutely.
You know, this we haven't even scratched the surface with
True.
cannabis. It's been so it's just set back. All these regulations has set us back for so long that I'm just fascinated for how far back we are, with just learning about it.
Yeah.
As we know, I mean, the hemp plant, there's no waste. There's no waste
No waste.
at all. I mean, you can use the biomass.
For polymers, Kevin, for polymers.
Yeah.
Here's my thing. If you say you love the environment, but how are you going to vote for not legalizing cannabis? Think about that.
Again, I think it goes back to the anecdotal data, being in a position of power. Obviously, there's ties too, right? If you're to a point where you're running for Senate or Congress, or even, of course, the presidency, you're making deals in the back end to say, okay, listen, I am going to support that political ideology, or I am going to support your organization's effort of what y'all are doing. And there's so many hands that you can shake, right?
Yes.
To the top, you have to, and that's where the flip-flopping comes in. I mean, there's people that were backing maybe one particular issue, and then they had to switch because they needed funding. I mean, you need.
That's right. One of my opponents are my representative in the district currently, Tony Tinder, who I mentioned. He is part of a very large Catholic church, which gives him a very large backing in our area: Arlington, Pantego, Central Dallas, Worthington Gardens. And he will keep putting through that abortion bill, HB 948 from last session, that's going to criminalize and put doctors and women in prison for seeking this care. as long as they support him, he is going to push that bill. It is how it goes. It's the business of politics. And when you're voting red and blue, notice these people are saying, I come from a long history of politics. That's why I am qualified. And it is quite the opposite, Kevin. We should be electing people who are not career politicians. We should be electing people who are going to go into the government to expose personal freedoms and shed the waste of any department, any worker, any ideologies governmentally that are going to suppress personal freedoms.
To give these politicians the benefit of the doubt, would you say
Sure.
that there are some that do have good intentions and that are not
Yes.
all about profit? And you know, are those people even heard? I mean,
Oh, yes. I would say there are several issues. Cannabis, one of them, obviously. This is one of the biggest issues that are going to help people. And so any candidate or any politician who supports bills, who help local judges or sheriffs to see that a little bit of plant in your pocket doth not make a terrible person. Anyone who is doing that has great intentions. Any blue teamer who is trying to get people the health care they need, including what I assume to be their cannabis, their medical cannabis in the end. They have great intentions. They're trying to help people. I think that any red teamer who is trying to get the government to release regulations on businesses to allow people to operate right now without having phased reopenings from COVID, for example, they have good intentions. They want people to be able to make money to feed their families, to continue the legacies that they've built as a Texan. Politicians have excellent intentions. But what is important, Kevin, are the actions that they take, their intentions with the government. A candidate that is elected, blue or red, does want to grow the government, a government which you and I and most of the people we know will say on at least a weekly basis that they do not trust. Red and blue team candidates are going to grow the government. They want programs, they want regulations. The only team who is going to shrink the government and expose personal freedoms and shed waste is the Libertarian Party, because our only goal eventually is no government, the tiniest government, the government that is going to have a defense that is good, one that will provide for the common area. We're going to have the most local governments helping people the best way they can. Like, imagine if I didn't have my health care plan with the United States government, but if I had it with Hospital on Main Street. Imagine how much easier it would to be administering care for the people in a neighborhood by a neighborhood hospital instead of having to fill out a form to see if it's okay, if you may please go to the doctor. So voting gold, it's the way, Kevin.
being on the ballot for this coming election in November, have you seen viewpoints change a little bit and the Libertarian Party start to be heard a bit more with all of this these regulations and guidelines due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, when it comes to both our personal cannabis freedoms, the COVID-19 pandemic, and basically parental or family rights, these are the people that I have in my life who have been most affected by government. And while some of them originally maybe thought government might be okay, I think now every single one of us, especially Texans, have at least one reason to say that we don't trust the government. And I've heard it time and time again. every week I speak to people about the Libertarian Party. I speak to them about anarchy and personal freedoms. And it used to be me just saying, hello, do you have time to hear about anarchy? But now it's more like people calling me out of the blue and saying, got any of that anarchy? You know what I mean, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell that more people are having discussion, especially, I mean, I'm on Twitter pretty actively, and I'm just kind of
Yes,
watching different conversations, and there's a lot more questioning going on as to the decisions that are being made in this particular climate. And I think that's great. You know what I mean? I think
definitely.
there's a lot of misinformation out there, both on the red team and blue team, you know,
Right.
and if you get comfortable just kind of being fed that information without having to critically think yourself and do research, you can get easily sucked into that narrative, which kind of adds to the problem, right? Because we already know it's one side versus the other. You know, we're all very tribal by human nature, so the more that we can take our biases and ourselves out of it and just really look at things more objectively, I think will be good just for mankind overall. You know.
Yes, and this year something very exciting is coming to your ballot box. We will see that straight ticket voting is being eliminated. So used to be that you roll up to your poll center, wait in the line, push the blue button or red, stick your sticker on, roll out.
Checks
You
off.
got the winning team. Everybody on the blue team is now selected, whether they're nefarious character or not. Not to mention the fact that with the knowledge of knowing all you have to do is press the blue team because that's the team you're on, I'm willing to venture that nearly no one who goes into a ballot and pushes straight ticketing has researched their candidates. I'm thinking no. I'm thinking there's no way, Kevin. What do you think?
No, I agree with you completely. And you know what I would like to see, um, when I go to a ballot box, right? For these major elections, really all you hear about is the presidential candidates, right?
That's right.
Because they have so much money that they've fundraised throughout the year, right?
You got it.
They've got the national, commercial spots. They've got the online advertising. I think the last election was like $100 million a day. Don't quote me on that, but like with Trump's campaign, it was some crazy amount. So they're reaching the airwaves and they're reaching people, right? And what gets drowned is the people at the local level, the candidates at the local and state level that really are the ones that pretty much impact your lives on a daily basis because you live
Yeah.
in states, right? What I would like to see is when I go to a ballot box, I'd like to see all of the state and local candidates lined up, and I would just like to see a box that says that has categories: social issues, economic issues,
Interesting.
international policies, and so
Yeah.
the box, for social issues, are they pro or against abortion? Yes or no? Boom, 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 boom. Very simple, so that you can see what matters most to you, and then you can decide right then and there. I don't think that would be very difficult to do.
Oh, heck no, especially considering there's already a rudimentary platform on the internet, isidewith.com. Go to isidewith.com and answer questions just like you mentioned, Kevin. How do I feel about healthcare? Should it be everyone, certain people, the poor? And once you answer all of these questions, how do I feel about cannabis? I love it. I also love all the drugs. Click everything, and then it'll say you're 76% with the Libertarian Party. But then you might say, nah, I don't want to waste my vote. But you would be wrong because you're going to go vote for someone who you don't side with. So go to isidewith.com right now, figure that out. And Kevin, you also made an interesting point. There is no reason why, if the government can force money into my bank account without my consent to stimulate me, that I can't go on to an internet and log and vote. By the way, voting And elections are big business in Texas. The difference between the red blue team, let's call it the purple team, the together team, and the gold team is that your money, whenever you do your renew your license, for example, there's a little box, check money to go to the presidential election fund. Why? Why though? So they can pay for spots on TV, so they can have these huge debates, so they can have huge caucuses, so they can have the primary election and the runoff election. On whose dollars, Kevin? On our dollars. The Libertarian Party met online last weekend to determine who our vice presidential and presidential candidates are going to be. It cost us not that much money. It's an old way of living, spending money to spend money to grow the government. New ways of living is Kevin style. Vote online, figure out your choices, and determine a proper candidate. We have so much innovation to do, and none of it is getting done with red and blue.
Well, that's a true statement for sure. I my previous background, I worked about 7 years for large tech companies in the B2B space, business to business.
Nice.
And obviously, working for those companies, you're right in the thick of all the innovation that's happening and whatnot. And then you look
Yep.
at the federal government and the state government, and they're on such legacy platforms, and it's just like, well, how do I even log in, or what is so you're right in terms of the government has a lot of catching up to do when it comes to technology and making things more efficient for its citizens. 100%.
Sure. There is a party. Usually, when you go to the ballot, if you go down to the bottom, you can see that there are so many candidates for president. On our last general election, there was a representative from the Technologies Party. So we have so many choices on the ballot, parties or individuals, candidates who are going to really revolutionize America. Look, I love the Constitution and everything, but we can't work on some old piece of paper forever. It is extremely important that the government has innovations in order to stay relevant, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a different world for sure. Technology has changed a lot of things in the way we communicate, the way we do business. So it's important to stay on top of those things and be relevant, like you're saying.
Yeah,
Um, so I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk
sure.
about health, right?
Yes.
And this is going to be somewhat probably controversial or interesting to some people because I know that I read an article that you're working on this program, Decriminalize Nature Dallas.
Yes, that's correct.
So for background, for people that don't know, Denver recently voted to decriminalize psychedelic mushrooms,
Yes.
which marked a significant shift in the whole debate over legalizing illegal drugs. And so, from my understanding, Jessica, are you trying to push that type of program here in Dallas? And if so, talk about the medicinal properties of psilocybin, which is a magic mushroom, or mescaline, that is usually known as peyote, right? And these drugs obviously have a lot of stigma. Seem and sound potentially dangerous from the outside, but someone who has experience with these drugs, tell us about them.
Yes, and just to tie it all together, the conversation that you're having with me sort of sounds like the same conversation that people have about cannabis, right? So, for the basis of it, let's just say that mushroom and mescaline containing cacti and ayahuasca herb plant and cannabis are just plants, ladies and gentlemen. Like, let's not get it twisted that cannabis is a far jump from another type of plant medicine that people are utilizing. But the benefits of psilocybin mushrooms, which you already mentioned, magic mushrooms, this is just a huge not issue for me as a freedom fighter. But as people who, like you said, would be concerned that they sound dangerous, Let's not forget our conversation earlier about the FDA approving 41% of drugs that have the side effect of death. So when framed in that discussion, I think that it's not unheard of that there would be a decriminalize Dallas initiative. Any type of entheogen, an entheogen would be a plant from the earth that has medicinal, spiritual, any sort of beneficial properties. These entheogens should not be legislated, same as cannabis. There are a lot less people who are getting thrown in jail for these other plants than for cannabis. So to me, it's just a little sidecar along the personal freedom trail. It's happened in Oakland, California. It's happened in Denver. Lots of cities have these initiatives to decriminalize the plants. There are many, many, many libertarians who advocate for legalizing all drugs, not on the basis that we want to be libertine and wild and nude in the street, but because people deserve a choice for their health care. They deserve to be able to grow their plants at low cost and take them at low risk at home in a safe place.
So specifically, like psilocybin, right? Like
Yes.
what is the benefit of taking something like that? Obviously, it's a hallucinogen, but I've heard this notion of microdosing. I think
Yes.
even technologists in Silicon Valley are microdosing LSD. Um,
Yes.
how is that helpful and beneficial?
Well, a microdose, well, just to level set with you, a general dose of psilocybin mushrooms will depend on your intention. If you want to have a trip that is a strong one, then you might take a heroic dose of 5 grams of mushrooms. It's your personal choice to go on an intense journey, whether you're trying to wring out emotions, chill for a long time, or wrestle with yourself on some conflicts that you need to work on your inside.
So
But some people, sorry, Kevin, they might take a microdose, which would be a 0.25 gram. This is a tiny amount of mushroom that you could ground up and put in a tiny capsule. This could effectively be a replacement for, like, let's say I'm not a doctor, I am not prescribing, ladies and gentlemen, a antidepressant, a Zoloft that you would want to take every day, something that would get you basically hooked. Your digestive system would start to rely on these materials, your brain pattern, your sleep, your attitude, your well-being, your moods are so extremely affected by this tiny Zoloft. Why not take a tiny little medicinal one that's basically just going to make you feel a little bit lighter that day? Basically, the psilocybin reacts with your compounds inside your body, same as an antidepressant pill that is prescribed rather, by your doctor. So tiny amounts of, yes, LSD for unlocking creativity, for solving issues, for healing trauma. The FDA is fast tracking MDMA, for example, as a therapeutic drug for people to clear their PTSD. I know hundreds of veterans who are utilizing these entheogens instead of their doctor prescribed medicines in order to heal. They are extremely beneficial in small or large doses.
and there's no physical addiction to those natural drugs like you just mentioned, psilocybin, mescaline, LSD, as opposed to like a Zoloft or a benzodiazepam that gets you hooked, right? You kind of fiend for it, and your body needs it. Is that right?
Well, as addiction is a sickness, I am not sure if taking these will make you addictive. I do know two things. One is that anything that is good and helpful is going to be habit forming, and you're going to want to do it a lot. So anything that is good can become habit forming if you don't do it responsibly. And the second bit is if you're talking about being addiction, meaning using these often, I think it's important to remember that there is no lethal dose of cannabis, just like there are no lethal lethal doses of uh, having other entheogens. The important part is that pills kill. Almost immediately, almost the first time sometimes. People have had horrible reactions to pharmaceuticals, while there have been less and less horrible incidents regarding entheogens.
Mm-hmm. It's entheogens, and I mean that's fairly new term for me. So maybe
Sure.
explain what that means into the audience.
Yeah, entheogens are materials from the earth, or these medicines that are derived from plant materials that have benefits to humans, that are medicinal, spiritual. A lot of these sacred entheogens, as we would say, are ones that are used in rituals, like in Amazon. A lot of people are going to retreats to where they're using DMT. Have you heard of that, Kevin?
Dimethyltryptamine, yes, I have.
Yes, dimethyltryptamine, indeed. And so the entheogens, the plant root herb and the leaf herb, put together for the ceremony of ayahuasca, for example.
Right, and DMT, for the audience who doesn't know, basically it's just a natural compound that our brain produces, but it's also found in our ecosystem, right? In blades,
Yes,
toads, I think
toads. Toads, yes.
the guy episode where I think that they're licking toads.
Yes, I think you're talking about Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, right?
Right, you're up.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, please go and on Hulu, right?
I,
Hulu, watch Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, and you will learn so much about sacred entheogens and how they're used in the United States and across the world. Hamilton Morris is an anthropological scientist. He studies, utilizes, and he talks to local people about these entheogens. It is the one thing that I would say, if you want to be entertained and learn about psychedelics, watch it. It's a good one.
It is. Yeah, that's a good recommendation. It's funny when we talked a little bit about microdosing and how
Yes.
LSD could be used for creativity, especially like we were saying, some of the technologists in Silicon Valley to solve problems or to come up with different types of innovations. And my perspective is, I obviously I wasn't born in the late '60s
Yes.
time, but
But you should have been.
yeah, maybe so, or
Yeah.
I think it might be from the future also though. So
Nice.
but it seems like the music back then, obviously, which was iconic, right? You had classic rock and you had
The
Woodstock,
psychedelic scene.
the psychedelic
Velvet Underground, yes.
culture, all that stuff. And then once those drugs became considered Schedule One narcotics, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that was a felony, a federal offense. I noticed that I always think about how the music changed from
Yes.
the late '60s to like the '80s. The '60s, you had the Doors, you had Grateful Dead. I mean, you had Jimi Hendrix. You had all of this type of music that's just so insane and captivating in the ears. And I'm not trying to downplay the '80s music at all, but it was just a whole different type of music, right?
Well, yes.
Like the more electronic piano.
Yes.
I think that a lot of I don't want to say that the creativity was lost a bit, but it was just a different take on musical creativity, I'd say.
Well, yeah, certainly. And when Prohibition began, well, you can see when Prohibition started getting strong, we started really funding the drug war. And that's when you'll see that Tipper Gore came forward and said, no more bad lyrics on songs. And you start to see a lot of overreach into the entertainment industry, into the movie film industry. You see, we have a new rating system. It's then censorship on the internet. Prohibition, it definitely lends to the suppression of artism and society, for sure.
It does, and we're seeing a lot of censorship today. We're living in it right now, which is
We're
very
living in it hard, and people are just kind of okay with it. You know,
yeah.
it's alarming, Kevin.
It is alarming, and it's an interesting time for sure. But it's important that we have conversations like this,
Yes.
where it's always important to value the other person's perspective, even if you do not agree with it.
Oh, yes.
There's too much of just this back and forth. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm not listening to you. I hate this candidate, therefore everything he does is wrong. Or
Sure.
I this person is incredible, so I'm going to deplatform them. And that's a
Good one.
dangerous way to live, I think, because without conversation and dialogue, it hinders innovation. It hinders growth, right?
Yeah, and when you're able to just go cast a ballot or cast a vote to throw your neighbor in jail because you don't like what they do, when you have the opportunity to just walk to your neighbor and do a conversation, a lot of people choose the former, and it's a problem.
Hmm. For sure. Well, Jessica, I mean, I think we're close to getting out to time here. I really appreciate you having you on. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with? Maybe share your website or your social media information they can follow you.
Sure, no problem. If you live in District 94 and you want to vote for a candidate that is not going to grow the government and who is definitely going to legalize cannabis, vote for me. I'm Jessica Pallett. See me on facebook.com/Pallett on the ballot. Also, like I mentioned, our Libertarian Party just nominated some excellent, excellent candidates for VP and for president. So please Google Joe Jorgensen, J-O, that's my lady friend, Joe Jorgensen, a lady scientist who is the best presidential candidate that you've ever seen, or presidential candidate you've ever seen in your life, and her running mate, Vice President Spike Cohen, a young millennial, a technology buff, somebody who's down to disrupt. This year is going to be extremely interesting. If you want to get on the winning team, you should join Gold. Google Joe Jorgensen.
Well, appreciate it. Let's hang on tight this year, guys. It's going to be a crazy election year, but
Yes, hold on.
we appreciate you being on, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
Bye.